I knew my marriage was over the moment my husband slid the thick stack of papers across the polished conference table and said, almost casually, "It's only fair we split everything down the middle. After all, we built this together." We were in the 19th floor boardroom of my own company, the one I started in a one-bedroom apartment with a second-hand laptop and a coffee table that doubled as a desk. The skyline glittered behind him, all glass and steel, a reflection of everything I had clawed my way toward while he slept in on weekends and called my late nights overreactions. He didn't look like a man ending a marriage. He looked like a man finalizing a business acquisition, his suit pressed, his tie perfectly knotted, his expression smooth. The unfairness of it all landed in the center of my chest. I had funded our life, bought our home, paid off his debts, and somewhere along the way he had convinced himself that my fortune belonged to him by default. I remember placing my fingertips on the top page, breathing once, twice, listening to the steady hum of the building instead of the roar in my own head. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow I have a special story for you. We, I repeated softly, tracing the word he'd used. Eli, what exactly do you think you built here? His jaw tightened for only a second. Then he smiled the way he smiled at investors he thought he could charm. Come on, Mara. Don't do that thing where you make me the villain. I stood by you. I moved cities for you. I hosted all those dinner parties. Partners love me. You know that. I lifted my eyes to his. You stood by me while I paid your credit cards, your old student loans, your sister's emergency surgery, and your father's gambling debts. That's not building, Eli. That's benefiting. Across from us. His lawyer shifted in her seat, trying to keep her face neutral. She looked maybe 10 years younger than him. Fresh, eager, ruthless in a way that reminded me of myself before I learned how expensive naivete could be. Look, Eli said, spreading his hands. We don't need to make this ugly. California's a community property state. The judge will just... We have a prenup. I cut in. His pupils flickered just for a heartbeat. He recovered quickly. That was a long time ago. Circumstances changed. Intent changed. A lot of courts see past that now, especially when one spouse sacrifices their own earning potential for the other's career. I thought about the promotion he'd turned down because it required moving to Chicago. How he'd told his friends he did it for my wife's company, when the truth was he didn't want to be cold or inconvenienced. My lawyer, David, sat silent beside me, watching, letting Eli talk. That was the thing about a quiet strategist. You learn to let noise expose itself. You're saying you sacrificed? I asked. Of course I did, he said. I could have been a partner by now if I'd taken that job. If I hadn't spent so much time helping you build your brand. I was the one who told you which clients to drop, which to chase. You think you'd have landed the Helix account without my intro? He huffed, leaning back. Honestly, Mara, without me, you'd still be coding in that cramped apartment. I gave you the confidence to take risks. The words should have cut. Once upon a time, they would have. Now, they simply arrange themselves in my mind like labeled evidence bags. There it was. The wound under glass years of being told that my achievements were a shared project while my sacrifices were a given. I thought of the nights I'd fallen asleep at my desk. The emergency room visit after my body finally caved under the strain. The way he complained about how dramatic it was, that I couldn't make it to his co-worker's birthday dinner that same night. Tell me what you want, I said. He relaxed slightly, mistaking my tone for surrender. Half the equity in the company. Half the house. Half the investments, obviously. Retirement accounts. That's just standard. And I want the Mercedes. You don't even like driving. I blinked. You want half of everything, I summarized. Yes, he said. It's what I deserve. Deserve. The word hung between us. Heavy, absurd, almost laughable. I felt the anger rise, hot and clean, but my voice stayed level. Years of being underestimated had refined my rage into something sharp and precise. You want half of what I built before I even met you, I said. Half of the company I started 3 years before you walked into my life. Half of the apartment I bought with my own savings. Half of the stocks I picked when your own portfolio was a negative number. You want half of what you didn't risk for, didn't bleed for, didn't stay up until 3 a.m. debugging for. His smile thinned. If you're going to turn this into a moral lecture, David finally spoke, his tone mild. We're not turning anything into anything, Mr. Lang. We're simply clarifying expectations. You're asking the court to invalidate a prenuptial agreement you signed freely and knowingly. That's a high bar. Eli shrugged. Then we'll see what the judge says. I'm prepared to fight this. I watched him carefully. The way I watched a buggy line of code you knew would crash the entire system if you let it pass. You can tell a lot about a person when they think they're about to win. You're prepared to fight, I repeated. Good, so am I. He mistook that for a threat delivered too late. He had no idea that, for the last 3 months, I had already been fighting, just not the way he expected. 3 months earlier, I had opened his laptop to stream a movie while mine was backing up. We didn't keep passwords from each other. I'd always thought of that as a good thing. Now I understood that transparency can cut both ways. His email was open, cursor blinking on a thread labeled **** re. Strategy for asset distribution. **** at first. I thought it was about a client. I clicked, and there it was. My husband, calmly discussing timelines and legal angles with a lawyer whose firm I recognized from their aggressive, high-net-worth divorce ads. He had started the conversation 6 weeks before our first rough patch argument about feeling emotionally disconnected. The first email read, ***, if she files first. Will I still be able to claim half of her premarital assets if I've been heavily involved in her business these last few years? The words didn't look real. I scrolled, my pulse roaring in my ears. Attached were spreadsheets I had never seen him work on, listing every account in my name, every property, every line of credit, annotated with little notes about joint lifestyle, sacrificed career opportunities, and emotional labor of supporting a founder. He had turned my life into a balance sheet. And then, near the bottom of the thread, one line that made my vision tunnel. ***, she's too trusting. I can convince her to restructure ownership under a new holding company. Once that's done, we treat it as community property. If she resists, we have other angles. Other angles. I didn't cry. Instead, I sat down slowly on the edge of the couch, reading and rereading until the shock hardened into something cooler. I emailed everything to myself, to a secure folder under a name that meant nothing to anyone but me, and then I closed his laptop and put it back exactly where I'd found it. Later that night, when he came home, he kissed my cheek, asked what I wanted to order for dinner, and told me about some funny thing that had happened at work. I listened. I laughed in the right places. I watched a man who was laying groundwork to rob me blind smile, as if we were still on the same team. That was the night my love for him died. It did not die loudly. It folded in on itself, a quiet, precise closing of a door inside my chest. In its place, something else woke up. Not vengeance exactly, just a clear, unwavering refusal to ever be that naive again. Within 48 hours, I had hired David, an old college friend turned ruthless family attorney, and a forensic accountant. Within 72, we had pulled the original prenup from the digital vault, and 3 separate hard copies from the safe deposit boxes my past self had opened in 2 different banks. Good girl. past me had essentially written in bold across every notarized page. You knew this could happen. That knowledge did not make the betrayal hurt less. But it did mean I wasn't defenseless. He thinks I'll panic and negotiate, I told David in his office, the city noise a faint buzz beneath the double-glazed windows. He thinks I'll crumble if he threatens court. He thinks judges are all old men who'll sympathize with him. He's already built a narrative where he has the dutiful husband who gave up everything for his difficult, ambitious wife. David tapped his pen against his legal pad, thoughtful. And what's the truth you want the court to see? I thought for a moment. I want them to see the contracts he signed, I said. And? David prompted. And the emails, I added. And the timelines. And the loans I paid. And the debts I covered. And the fact that every risk he refused to take I took. I want them to see that he didn't just fail to build this with me. He actively tried to reposition himself to profit from an exit he thinks I am too sentimental to protect myself from. David smiled faintly. Then we start there. We don't scream. We don't insult. We don't dramatize. We just show the math. I exhaled slowly, the plan beginning to take shape. Quiet knife, not loud chaos. The next few weeks were a study in controlled performance. At home, I played my role. Distracted, a little tired, trying to reconnect like the couple's therapist had suggested. At work, I moved like a surgeon. We restructured the ownership of the company legally, transparently, in exact adherence to our prenup and my estate plan, confirming that the majority stake would remain in a trust I'd established years ago, with clear language that it was separate property not subject to marital division. I updated beneficiaries. I separated business accounts that had gotten blurred with personal spending. I documented everything, every transfer, every signature, every email to my CFO and legal team. On paper, it looked like prudent housekeeping. In reality, it was fortifying the walls before the siege began. At night, Eli would sit on the couch scrolling through his phone, occasionally showing me memes, occasionally asking if I thought we should try a new restaurant that opened downtown. I would nod, smile, rest my head on his shoulder. And then I would excuse myself to finish a deck and go to the study, where I built a different kind of presentation. Slide by slide, I assembled screenshots of his emails, copies of his messages to friends bragging about how he struck gold, marrying a founder, his texts complaining about how humiliating it was that my bonus was bigger than his salary. There were messages to his brother where he joked half serious, half not that. If things didn't work out, he'd cash out in the divorce. At first, reading them made my hands shake. Over time, they just became data. You're sure you want to include the personal messages? David asked one afternoon as we went over the materials in his office. I don't want to smear him for the sake of it, I said. I just want the court to understand intent. The prenup is solid, I know that. But I also know how persuasive it can be when a man cries about feeling powerless in a world that supposedly favors women now. They need to see he wasn't some fragile, blindsided partner. He was calculating. David nodded slowly. Then we tailor it. We don't dump everything. We cure it. Enough to show patterns. Not enough to look vindictive. It was a strange thing. Building a case against someone you used to fall asleep next to. Someone whose heart you'd once trusted more than your own instincts. Stranger still to realize that those instincts had been whispering at you for years, and you'd just been too busy, too hopeful, too loyal to listen. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. The first real fracture between us happened over dinner at his parents' house. We were passing the roasted potatoes when his mother, always fond of tiny knives disguised as compliments, said, "We saw that article about your company. Mara, very impressive. Eli, you must feel a bit overshadowed these days, hmm?" She laughed lightly, as if it were all a joke. Eli didn't say, "I'm proud of her." He didn't say, "We're a team." He shrugged, took a sip of his wine, and said, "Well, it's technically our success. I practically run PR for her." I paused, fork halfway to my mouth. "PR," I repeated. He grinned. "You hate talking to people. I'm the one charming investors at dinners. I keep clients happy when she wants to cancel everything and work." His father chuckled. "Smart boy. Marry a rich woman before she gets famous." The table laughed. I didn't. I watched Eli watch them laugh. The way he basked in it. The way he never even glanced at me to see how it landed. In that moment, I understood something with cold, perfect clarity. He liked being adjacent to my success as long as he could reinterpret it as his own cleverness. He loved the lifestyle more than he had ever loved the person furnishing it. That night, while he snored quietly beside me, I lay awake, my mind tracing every conversation we'd had in the past year. The weekend he'd pushed me to buy the lake house for our future kids, even though I'd said we should wait. The way he'd insisted we merge certain accounts for simplicity. The way he'd reacted when I once joked that if we divorced, I'd leave him the dog and keep everything else. "You can't do that," he'd said sharply, just for a second. I had laughed it off. Now, those little moments reassembled themselves into a clear picture. This had never been about us. It had always been about access. When the official divorce petition arrived ironically, 2 days after our couple's therapy session, where he decried about wanting to rebuild trust, I felt no shock. Just a deep, exhausted confirmation. He served me at the office, not at home. Optics always. I read the language carefully. He framed himself as the devoted spouse who had subordinated his own professional advancement to support my career, citing my travel schedule, my stress, my need for constant reassurance. He claimed a significant emotional burden and loss of earning potential that entitled him to half of my premarital assets. He did not mention the prenup. He did not mention that he had insisted on quitting one job because he hated his boss, not because I asked him to. He did not mention the nights I had sat on the floor with his sister, figuring out how to negotiate her hospital bills because their parents couldn't. He did not mention the envelopes of cash I had handed his mother when his father's gambling spiraled again. But my envelope, my literal, physical envelope, was waiting. By the time of our first court hearing, it was thick but neatly organized, every document tabbed and cross-referenced. David called it our quiet bomb. "We don't open with it," he said as we stood outside the family court building on the morning of the hearing. The air smelled faintly of exhaust and cheap coffee. We let them feel confident. We let them make their argument. Then, when the judge asks if we have a response, we hand it over. No speeches, just facts. "And you're sure the judge will actually read it?" I asked. "I'm sure," he said. "They like when we save them time. Judges hate dramatics. They love concise, well-documented truth." I smoothed the front of my navy dress, feeling the weight of the moment like a stone in my stomach. I wasn't nervous about losing my money anymore. The prenup, the trust, the restructuring, we had all of that locked. What I was nervous about was facing Eli in a space where he would be incentivized to present himself as the victim of my ambition. For years, I had subconsciously contorted myself to make sure he never felt small beside me. Today, I would stop doing that. Today, he would have to stand next to me as he really was. A grown man who had tried to weaponize my success against me. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. No towering ceilings. No dramatic woodwork, just beige walls, a tired-looking seal above the judge's bench, and rows of hard wooden benches. Eli sat at the petitioner's table with his lawyer, impeccably put together, tie a shade of blue he knew looked good on him. He didn't look at me when I walked in. That, more than anything, stung. Once, he had watched for me in every room. Now, he avoided my gaze like it might burn him. We were called to stand, then sit. The choreography of the court both formal and oddly mundane. His lawyer spoke first. She painted a picture of a man who had given his prime years to supporting a high-intensity founder, whose demanding schedule had left him socially isolated and professionally stalled. She used phrases like behind the scenes, unseen emotional labor, and shared endeavor. I listened. She did not lie outright. She simply rearranged facts in a way that made him sound like a martyr. Eli kept his expression appropriately solemn. When his lawyer mentioned my company's valuation, there was a tiny, almost imperceptible lift at the corner of his mouth. I felt my hands curl into fists in my lap. David leaned closer, murmuring, "Breathe." We knew they'd do this. When it was our turn, David didn't launch into a rebuttal. He simply rose, buttoned his jacket, and said, "Your Honor, my client has brought a sealed packet of documents that we believe will clarify the financial and contractual context of this marriage. With the court's permission, we'd like to submit it for your review before making any further argument." The judge, a man in his 60s with a kindly but tired face, looked mildly curious. "All right, counsel. Bring it up." David handed the envelope to the bailiff, who brought it to the clerk, who passed it up to the bench. It was a simple manila envelope, unremarkable except for the weight of what it contained. I watched Eli's eyes flick to it, then away. He still looked unconcerned. The judge opened it, slid the contents out, and began to read. The room was so quiet I could hear the faint buzz of the fluorescent lights overhead. He flipped through the printout first, his gaze moving quickly but clearly taking note of the notarization dates, the clear waivers of claims to premarital assets, the detailed language about separate and community property. Then he moved to the emails. His eyebrows lifted. He read one page more closely, lips pressing together. He flipped to the next, then the next, his expression shifting from mild interest to something sharper disbelief, perhaps tinged with irritation. When he reached the annotated spreadsheet where Eli had listed my assets and written notes like asterisk, right for division asterisk and asterisk, can be reclassified if I push for joint ownership now. Asterisk, the judge actually paused. And then, very softly, he huffed. Not quite a laugh, more like the first breath of one he was trying to contain. Eli's lawyer shifted uneasily. "Your Honor, if I may." The judge held up a hand without looking at her, still turning pages. He reached the printout of the email in which Eli wrote to his friend. Asterisk. If this goes the way my lawyer says it can, I walk away with half without ever having to work like she did. Not a bad retirement plan, huh? Asterisk this time. The judge did laugh. It wasn't a cruel sound. It was tired, incredulous, the sound of a man who had seen this pattern too many times and still found new ways for it to disappoint him. He set the papers down, removed his glasses, and looked directly at Eli for the first time. "Mr. Lang," he said slowly, "do you dispute that you wrote these emails?" Eli swallowed. I'd have to see them in context. We were. I was frustrated. That wasn't my question, the judge said, his tone sharpening. Did you or did you not write these emails? There was no way out. I may have, Eli said finally. People vent. It doesn't mean. What it means, the judge interrupted, is that you were, at minimum, actively strategizing how to circumvent a prenuptial agreement that clearly delineates your wife as premarital assets as separate property. It also suggests that your claim of having been blindsided or disadvantaged rings somewhat hollow. His lawyer opened her mouth. Your Honor, we would argue that these emails, while unfortunate in tone, do not negate the reality of my client's contributions to the marriage, the judge said, pinching the bridge of his nose. I have read the prenup. I have reviewed the notarization. I have compared it to the timeline of this marriage and to the documents your opposing counsel has supplied regarding asset restructuring. Everything your client's wife has done appears to be in line with the agreement he signed. What concerns me is not her adherence to the law. It is his apparent intent to sidestep it. He turned back to me. Miss Harley, he said, using my surname with a small nod, you have been more than thorough. Relief washed through me so quickly I almost felt dizzy. Thank you, Your Honor, I said quietly. He looked between us. Here is what is going to happen. The court recognizes the validity of the prenuptial agreement in full. All premarital assets and any assets clearly maintained as separate property per that agreement will remain yours, Ms. Harley. We will of course still address the division of community property acquired during the marriage, but based on what I see here, Mr. Lang, your expectation of walking away with half of your wife's company and premarital investments is frankly unfounded. Eli's face went pale. His lawyer tried to regroup, shifting her argument to spousal support, emotional contributions, anything she could salvage. But something had already broken in the room. The narrative had cracked. The judge glanced once more at the email where Eli had called me too trusting, and my divorce a retirement plan. I would also strongly advise you, he added, to reconsider any further attempts to mischaracterize your wife's success as something you are entitled to reap without having sown. The court does not look kindly on such attitudes, particularly when they are documented in your own words. Another soft huff of incredulous amusement escaped him. The sound wasn't just about Eli. It was about every person who had walked into his courtroom thinking charm or entitlement could rewrite contracts. Eli finally looked at me then. Really looked. There was no love in his eyes. No remorse, not yet. Only shock, disbelief, and the dawning realization that the version of the story he'd been telling himself for months had just collided with reality. For the first time since this started, I did not look away. I let him see me clearly, not as the soft landing he'd always counted on, but as the woman who had quietly gathered every receipt, every contract, every signature that proved I had built my life before him and, now, would continue building it without him. When the hearing adjourned, there was no dramatic shouting, no storming out. Just the shuffling of papers, the scrape of benches, the low murmur of other lives colliding with the legal system. Outside the courtroom, in the hallway that smelled faintly of industrial cleaner and burnt coffee, Eli caught up to me. You set me up, he said, his voice low, eyes burning. I turned to face him fully. No, Eli. I stopped letting you set me up. There's a difference. He glanced at David, then back at me. You didn't have to humiliate me in there. You could have just negotiated. We could have handled this privately. You tried to steal half my life's work, I said, my tone calm, almost gentle. You made plans behind my back. You laughed about it in emails. And now you're embarrassed because the judge didn't buy your story. That's not humiliation, Eli. That's consequence. His jaw clenched. You're cold. You know that. You're ice. For years, that accusation would have gutted me. I had spent so much of my life trying to prove I was warm enough, loving enough, soft enough to balance the sharp edges of my ambition. Now, I let the words sit between us without flinching. No, I said quietly. I'm clear. He stared at me like he didn't recognize the woman standing in front of him. In a way, he didn't. The woman he had married would have begged, bargained, bent herself into new shapes to keep us together. The woman standing here now had read every line of his strategy and chosen herself instead. "This isn't over," he muttered finally, stepping back. "It is for me," I said, and I meant it. The months that followed were not glamorous. Divorce rarely is. There were more hearings, more negotiations over furniture, cars, mutual friends, and shared memories that couldn't be neatly divided. His lawyer tried a few more angles of plea for temporary support, a suggestion that my emotional demands had hindered his career, but each attempt collapsed under the weight of the documents we had already provided. The prenup held. The trust held. My company remained mine. He walked away with only what he had truly contributed to. Half the equity in the house we bought together. Half the savings from the joint account we both paid into. Not nothing, but nowhere near the retirement plan he'd imagined. Our final day in court was oddly quiet. The judge signed the decree, confirmed the division of assets, and wished us both luck. No speeches, no grand declarations. Just a stamp, a signature, and the official end of a chapter that had already ended inside me months ago. Outside, the sky was a flat, anonymous grey. People hurried past the courthouse, carrying coffees, backpacks, tired children. Life went on. David handed me a manila folder with the final copies. "You did well," he said. "You did most of it," I replied. He shook his head. "No, you did years ago, when you signed that prenup and when you kept your records. I just showed the judge what you already knew. You didn't owe this man your future just because he shared your past." I stood there for a moment, feeling the truth of that settle into my bones. He was right. I had always been the one building. For a long time, I'd just been too used to carrying other people while I did it. Now, for the first time, I felt the weight shift. I could build for me. My phone buzzed. A text from Eli. *, I hope you're happy. * once. That line would have sent me into a spiral, questioning myself, wondering if I had been too harsh. Today, I simply read it, then typed back. * eventually, yes. And you will be too. Once you stop treating other people's work like your safety net. * I didn't wait for a response. I blocked his number, not out of spite, but out of a clear understanding that our story had reached its final page. Then I walked down the courthouse steps, the folder tucked under my arm, the weight on my chest noticeably lighter. I didn't have a grand plan for what came next. Just a quiet certainty that whatever I built from here on out would be mine fully, unapologetically, without anyone standing beside me rehearsing their claim to half. At home that night, I sat at my kitchen table, the one I had bought before him, that I would keep after him, and opened my laptop. There were emails from potential partners, a note from my CFO about a new opportunity, a message from a young founder asking for advice. I answered them one by one, my fingers moving steadily over the keys. For years, I had told myself that sharing my life meant sharing everything, even the parts I'd built alone. Now, I understood that partnership without respect isn't sharing. It's theft dressed up as love. I closed my laptop, leaned back, and exhaled. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.